What's up everyone, I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, where we cover all things Swift and SwiftUI related. And in this very fun video, we're going to look at presenting multiple different sheets from a single view in our SwiftUI application. Now, if you were with me in the SwiftUI bootcamp, I already did a whole video on how to use the sheet modifier, the basics of how to use sheets. And in that video, I discussed how you should never use conditional logic in the closure of your sheet. And now the reason I'm doing a whole video on this specific issue is because it is probably the most common issue that I've seen on StackOverflow from people who are learning SwiftUI. And the issue is very simple, that people use a sheet modifier, they try to add some conditional logic in the sheet, and then when they go to present a second or third screen, it's showing the wrong screen. So in this video, I'm going to first walk you through that exact problem. So if you've experienced it before, or even if you've never experienced, you will know what not to do. And then we're going to look at 3 different ways to very easily solve for this in our app.
All right, welcome back everyone. In our Xcode project, and like we always do, let's right-click the navigator, create a new file. This one will of course be a SwiftUI view, and let's call this Multiple Sheets Bootcamp. Go ahead and click Create, and click Resume on the canvas to make sure we're all connected. And let's start out this video by setting up our screen here. Let's add a VStack with maybe some spacing of 20. Open the brackets, and inside the VStack we're going to add 2 buttons. Let's do button, open the parentheses. Let's use the title, string protocol, and action approach. The title, let's put button 1. On the action, click enter. And then I'm just going to copy this, paste it again, and this time I'll make it button 2. Clickers, try again on the canvas, make sure we're connected. We got our 2 buttons. And the whole point of this video is to show multiple sheets from one single screen. So when we click button 1, we want to present the sheet and go to screen 1. And then when we click button 2, we still want to go to a sheet, but we want to go to screen number 2 instead of screen number 1. And the reason I'm going over this is because I've seen so many people have problems with this. So let's start out by just addressing the problem. And to do that, we're first going to create a model at the top here. Let's create a struct, and we'll call this random model. Why not? Let's make this conform to identifiable, and then we'll open the brackets. And to conform to identifiable, we need an ID, so we'll say let ID, and we'll set it equal to a random ID. So UUID, open and close parentheses, dot UUID string. Just going to create a random ID for each model. And then very basic, let's just add a title. So we'll say let title of type string. All right, now in our view, let's create and at the top here, we'll create an @state var selected model of type random model. And we'll set this equal to start to a random model, and we'll give it a title of starting title. Why not? And when we click button 1, we want to update the selected model to a new model. So we'll say selected model equals random model. And we'll just say 1. And then when we click button 2, we'll say selected model equals random model. And this time we'll make the title 2. And then we want to present a sheet, because after all, this video is all about presenting sheets. So I'm going to add a .sheet modifier. We're going to use the isPresented and content. And I did an entire video in the SwiftUI bootcamp on sheets. So I'm going to assume that you already know how the basics of a sheet work. And what we're going to go through now is just more advanced ways we can use this sheet modifier, because it is a little tricky to use. So if you're not familiar with this sheet and this isPresented little logic here, I will link my original video in the caption below so you can get familiar with the basics of a sheet first. But if you are familiar, definitely keep on going here. And as you know, we need an isPresented boolean. So let's create an @state var show sheet of type bool, and we'll set this equal to false. And we'll bind it with the money sign show sheet. And then lastly, we need some content to present. And I'm going to create a new screen for this content. So at the bottom, underneath this struct, I'm going to create another new struct for a second screen. This will say struct. Let's call it next screen. Why not? We'll make it conform to view. Open the brackets. And every view we know needs a body. And we'll open the brackets again. I'm going to keep this really simple because I don't really care how these screens look. I just want to go through the sheet logic with you guys. So let's just add a text here. Let's just leave it a blank string for a second, and we'll give it a .font of large title. And when we are showing the sheet, we want to present the selected model. So in this next screen, I'm going to pass in as a variable, we'll say let selected model of type random model. And then the text will actually be the selected model .title. All right, so this should not be anything new to you guys. We're just creating a very basic screen here. We're just with some text, and the text will be whatever the random model title is. So either 1, 2, or starting title. And in the content, we're going to present a next screen, open the brackets, open the parentheses, and selected model. And now, of course, I can pass in the selected model here, and I'll pass this in. And the last thing we need to do is actually toggle the show sheet. So when we click button 1, we're going to update the selected model, and then we're going to say show sheet.toggle. When we click button 2, we're going to update the selected model and then show sheet.toggle. So if you've never done this before, you would probably expect that when we click button 1, the selected model is now going to say 1 instead of starting title. And then we're going to show the sheet, and when we click the show next screen, it's going to show us a selected model, which hopefully will have the title of 1. And if I run the simulator and I click on button 1, you'll see that it still says starting title because it does not work. And that's what I'm highlighting here. This approach is very, very close, but it actually does not work. And I want to note that if I run it one more time and I click maybe button 2, it doesn't work. And if I wipe it down and then click it again, it will work on the second time. So this really throws some people off because it seems like it's working some of the time, but it doesn't work all of the time. And the problem here is that the content for this next screen is being created as soon as this sheet modifier is added onto the screen. So when this VStack is drawn onto the screen, we draw this sheet, and that's at the very beginning as soon as we load the screen. And we know that when we load the screen, before we click any button, the selected model actually says starting title. And that's why when this content is created, it still says starting title. So again, if I start the simulator one more time and I click on button 2, it's still going to say starting title. That's because this content was created before we actually clicked on the button. And I'm going to show you one more way that does not work, so you don't have to copy me here, but I've seen a lot of people try to get around this problem by adding some if-let, some conditional logic into this content. So I could do maybe at state var selected index of type int, and we'll set it equal to 0. And when I click button 1, we'll say selected index equals 1. And then for button 2, we'll do selected index equals 2. And then for the content, instead of just the next screen, we could do something like if selected index is equal to 1, next screen with a random model, and we'll give it 1. And then we can say else if selected index is equal to 2, and I can copy this and put this here, and we can do number 2. And then I can do else. So if it's not 1 or 2, we just do a next screen with a selected model, random model, and we'll say starting title. So this time we have some conditional logic inside the sheet so that hopefully if we update the index to number 2, it's going to present us the next screen number 2. So I'm going to try again on the simulator quick. Let's reload it. This is not going to work. I'm doing this on purpose just to show you guys. If I restart the simulator and I click on number 2, it still shows the starting title. So even though we tried changing the selected index to 2 and then hopefully adding some conditional logic and presenting this number 2, this does not work either. And this is why in the first sheet video, I kind of touched on the concept that I would avoid adding any logic inside this sheet closure whenever possible. Because again, this content is executing and it's being created as soon as the sheet is onto the screen. So when we first load our screen right now, the index is actually 0. So it's not 1, it's not 2, and we're going into this else closure here. So that's why we see the starting title at the bottom. And now that we've reviewed a couple different ways how this does not work, let's just jump into the solutions. And again, I have seen this question and people trying to execute something like this so many times on StackOverflow and Udemy because, this seems very logical, but of course it does not work. So I'm going to delete all of our conditional logic in here. Let's put our next screen back. I'm going to delete this selected index because we're not going to actually use it. And up here as well. And we're going to go over 3 different ways to get this to actually work. I'm going to put at the top here just a little comment. The first way we're going to do is use a binding. The second way we're going to use multiple dot sheets. And the third way we're going to do it is use the item approach. All right, so let's first start with the binding. And right now, again, this is the first way that we did it. We tried to update the selected model, show the sheet, and the selected model right now is not updating on this next screen. So if I click the resume button, I click on number 2, it still says starting title, which is where it started here. But what I could do is in the next screen, instead of having this be a constant, let selected model equal random model, I can make this binding so that if this variable changes, this state variable, it also gets updated in the next screen. So we can do instead at binding var selected model of type random model. And then all we need to do to update that, we just need the money sign to bind to the selected model. So that's simple. We were very close the first time. If I click resume on the canvas, and I click on button 2, what do you know? It does now work. And all we had to do was make this selected model binding. So that was a nice easy fix and definitely something I recommend doing in your apps if you need to. So that was the number 1 here. But a lot of times making this variable binding might ruin other things in this view. So if this view had a lot of complex logic in it and for some reason you needed a specific model, you couldn't use a binding model, maybe because you're using other components that required this model to be static so that it doesn't change, well, then this binding approach would not work. So let's look at other ways that we can solve this. And the next way we're going to look at is using multiple sheets. And when we do this, we actually don't need this to be binding anymore. So we're going to change this back to let. And this is going to throw an error, so I got to get rid of the money sign here. And this time, when we click on button 2, we're going to add our own sheet for button 2. So we'll do say dot sheet, and we'll use the is presented. And then we're going to create a second Boolean for this sheet specifically. So at state var show sheet 2 of type bool equals false. This will be money sign show sheet 2. And then the content here, the content for number 2 is always going to be this random model. So we're going to add next screen, open the parentheses. And the selected model, we're just going to create it right here. We'll say random model, open the parentheses, 2. So when we're using this approach, we actually don't need to update the selected model at all. I can comment it out here as well. And of course, when we click on button 2, we want to show sheet number 2. So show sheet 2.toggle. And I'm going to resume the canvas here. This is not going to work real quick, but I just want to point something out. So when I click on button 2, it should show sheet 2.toggle and then present this screen. But if I click on button 2, nothing is actually happening right now. And some of you might also run into this error with sheets. And the problem is that you can only have one sheet modifier per view hierarchy. So right now, this sheet is in the child hierarchy of this sheet. Okay, so this sheet is on this bracket here. And the second sheet is now a child of this master parent container. And the way SwiftUI sheets work is that you can only have one sheet per hierarchy. So the fact that this one is in the parent container of this one, it cancels it out. So this is the only working sheet in our view right now. But of course, this is not what we wanted to do. We wanted to present multiple sheets. So I'm going to highlight this master sheet here and comment it out. And on button number 1, I'm just going to add .sheet, money sign, show sheet. Let's use the first one. And then here we will do next screen, open the parentheses, random model, and the title will say 1. So now we can actually use two different sheets because they are the same level. They're not parent-child of each other. So while this one was in that parent container, the container on this one has nothing to do with the container on this one. So if I click resume now, we can see that if I click either of these, they will work 100% of the time. So if I click button number 2, it's always going to show me 2. If I click 1, it's always going to show 1 because these sheets are totally separate now, and this is working. So this is another great solution to the problem. Creating two sheets, all you have to do is make sure that they're not in the same hierarchy of each other. So if you had like one button on the top left to go to a profile and one button on the top right to go to settings, you could do it like this, and it would save you a lot of time and effort just to put two different sheets, as long as they're not in a parent-child hierarchy. Okay, so that's number 2 down. And now we're going to jump into the third way. And the reason this third way could be better for some cases is because while this sheet and sheet works, we have to create a new @state variable for each one. So if we had like 100 different items or 100 different possible sheets, this could be really, really time consuming and annoying. And I wouldn't want to create show sheet a whole bunch of times. This is great if we have 2 or 3, but if we need to do like 5 or 10, it would just get annoying. So what I'm going to do is actually delete these 2 sheets that we just added, because we're not going to use those anymore for this third effort here. And where we have this bottom master sheet on the VStack, I'm going to make a new .sheet. And this time we're going to use the item and content completion. So normally we use the isPresented and then we toggle a show sheet boolean. But this time we're going to use the item content. But this time, instead of updating a show sheet boolean for the isPresented, we need to bind to some kind of variable that conforms to identifiable and is optional. So if I scroll up, when we created this random model, we made it identifiable. We gave it an ID. And now this selected model, let's just make this random model optional by giving it a question mark. And we don't even need the starting title anymore, so I'm just going to set it equal to nil for now. And we are going to bind directly to the selected model. So we'll do money sign selected model. And because we're binding to the selected model, we no longer need the show sheet booleans at all, because there is no more isPresented. So I'm going to delete these. While we're at it, we can delete this show sheet.toggle. We can delete this show sheet.toggle. And I'm just going to actually delete this bottom sheet here because we're not using it. And then of course we need a view to show when we update it. So we're going to press enter here. So just like we do on the for each loops, I'm going to delete this little bit of code here and just put a model in. So when we click on the selected model, it's going to provide us with the new model that has just been selected. So that's this model here. And the code in here is just going to be next screen, open the parentheses, and we'll just pass in that model. And finally, of course, when we click on button 1, we just need to update that selected model. Click on button 2, update to number 2. And so now using this item completion, I can resume my canvas, and you can see how clean and nice and clean and short our code is here. And if I click on button number 2, it should hopefully show us number 2. And that's because anytime you update this selected model now, so all we need to do is set this selected model to anything, and it's going to present us another screen. And this is actually super handy because it's pretty scalable. So for example, if I added in here a for each, and we did maybe data or 0 ... less than 50. Click enter. Let's make this the index. And I'm just going to take this button code, put it here in the for each loop. Let's delete the second one. Let's make the button title have button, and then we'll do the backslash, open close parentheses, index. So we can see all the indexes. And then when we have the selected model, we'll say random model, and instead of just saying 1 for now, let's just put in the index. So we'll say backslash, open close parentheses, index. It's not perfect, but you're going to get the gist here. And finally, this is going off the screen, so let's put the whole thing in a scroll view. Open the brackets. I'll cut this, put it inside. And now you can see that if I click on any of these, number 36, we can go to screen number 36. So this is super scalable because now we have all of these different possible sheets we can go to. If I click on number 10, it goes to 10. If I click on number 4, it goes to number 4. It works, and it works every time. So this will become very useful if maybe you had like a list of profiles or something and you wanted to pass in a user instead of this just model. Well, you could have that profile view and then pass in a user for all of the different users. All right, everyone, that's it for this video. If you have never run into that sheet problem, you might be just scratching your head here, kind of wondering why I went into this in so much detail, but I have seen this problem over and over and over again as people try to make their applications. So I just really wanted to touch on a couple different ways to handle presenting multiple sheets from a single view. I hope this video was helpful. I hope this helps someone out there so that you don't post it on Stack Overflow, because I've seen it on Stack Overflow 1,000 times and I've seen people struggling, just scratching their head. Why is this not working? Well, here's the solution. All right, guys, thank you all for watching. As always, I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.